Imagine standing at a busy intersection, the city blurring into a chaotic symphony of motion. Horns blaring, neon lights flickering, conversations overlapping in fragmented echoes. You're supposed to cross, but you hesitate. Not because the traffic light is unclear, but because your mind is. You can't decide whether to move forward or wait, and for a fleeting moment, you realize something unsettling. The confusion outside mirrors the confusion within. Most people think unclear thinking is about ignorance or lack of intelligence. But the truth runs deeper and darker. Even the most brilliant minds can drown in fog. The human brain, astonishing as it is, was never designed for clarity. It was designed for survival. Millennia ago, our ancestors didn't need to weigh the subtleties of moral dilemmas or long-term investments. They needed to spot predators, find shelter, and react fast. Think clearly wasn't a luxury. It was irrelevant. What mattered was quickness, not correctness. Fast forward to the modern world, and we're still operating on that ancient wiring. Our minds crave certainty in a world overflowing with ambiguity. We seek comfort in opinions, tribes, and narratives that simplify the unbearable complexity of reality. The internet amplifies this. Every click reinforces a belief, every algorithm feeds us what we already think, and every debate becomes an echo chamber. The result? We no longer think to discover truth. We think to defend identity. And yet, deep down, there's a whisper that won't be silenced. A quiet yearning to see things as they are, to make decisions not clouded by fear, emotion, or bias, but guided by insight. That whisper is the beginning of clarity. But to reach it, one must first confront the enemy within, the noise. Noise isn't just sound. It's mental static. It's the internal chatter that drowns out discernment, the endless loop of what-ifs, should-haves, and self-doubts. We scroll through distractions not because we're bored, but because silence terrifies us. In silence, the mind reveals its disorder, and that confrontation can feel unbearable. So we avoid it. We chase stimulation until thought itself becomes a background hum. To think clearly, you must first learn to listen, not to others, but to the subtle tension between your thoughts. Every great decision-maker in history learned this art. They recognized that beneath the clamor of opinion lies a current of reason, a river that runs still and deep. But finding that river requires courage, the courage to pause. Pause when you feel certain. Pause when you feel angry. Pause when you feel desperate to decide. Because clarity does not come in motion. It comes in stillness. The paradox of clear thinking is that it cannot be forced, it must be allowed. Philosopher Blaise Pascal once wrote, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." He was right, not metaphorically but psychologically. The inability to sit in stillness reveals our addiction to noise. And this addiction blinds us. So the first step toward thinking clearly is not learning new frameworks or reading more books. It's unlearning the reflex to react. It's recognizing that most confusion isn't caused by lack of information, but by excess. Like a glass of muddy water, the mind clears not when stirred, but when left to settle. Stand again at that intersection. The city is still noisy, the lights still flashing, but this time you stand differently. You breathe, watch, and wait. The noise doesn't vanish, but it loses power. In that pause, a small space opens between thought and reaction, and in that space, something remarkable happens. You begin to see, and that seeing, raw and unfiltered, is where clarity begins. Picture the mind as a grand cathedral, majestic, intricate, yet filled with hidden chambers and trick mirrors. Every belief you hold, every conviction you defend, is a brick in its architecture. The problem is, many of those bricks were laid without your permission. They were placed there by childhood conditioning, social influence, cultural myth, and the invisible hand of emotion. You walk through this mental cathedral each day, mistaking its structure for truth, never realizing how much of it is illusion. The greatest obstacle to clear thinking isn't stupidity, it's self-deception. The human brain is an expert architect of false clarity. It prefers coherence over truth, comfort over uncertainty. When reality conflicts with what we already believe, The mind doesn't rewrite the belief, it bends reality. This cognitive acrobatics is what psychologists call confirmation bias. You've seen it before. The investor who ignores evidence of a market crash, the lover who overlooks red flags, the leader who doubles down on a failing idea because admitting error feels like death. But why are we wired this way? Because to the brain, survival always outweighs truth. Certainty feels safe. Doubt feels dangerous. That's why we cling to narratives, even flawed ones. They stabilize the chaos of existence. The mind, in essence, is a storyteller that hates plot holes. Consider this: every decision you make is filtered through what neuroscientists call a mental model, an internal representation of how you believe the world works. These models are not reality itself. They are simplified maps. The trouble begins when you mistake the map for the territory. You navigate life using outdated mental cartography, beliefs formed years ago, under conditions that no longer exist. You see patterns where none exist, draw conclusions from incomplete data, and then call it logic. To think clearly, one must dare to question the very foundation of one's thinking. This is where most people turn back because clarity is not gentle, it destroys. It dismantles illusions with surgical precision. To see your own biases, your inherited beliefs, your emotional triggers, and call them by name, that is an act of quiet heroism. Ask yourself, how many of your thoughts are truly yours? How many are echoes of authority, repetition, or fear? Every time you say, "That's just how I am," pause. Is it, or is it how you were conditioned to be? The pursuit of clear thinking demands radical self-honesty, and radical honesty is rarely comfortable. It means admitting you could be wrong about everything you think you know. But here's the paradox. The more you accept your capacity for error, the sharper your clarity becomes. Humility, not certainty, is the foundation of reason. The wisest minds in history were not those who had the most answers, but those who understood the limits of their own perception. As Socrates famously said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." To think clearly, you must learn to deconstruct your mental architecture piece by piece. Examine your assumptions, test your intuitions, challenge your convictions. This doesn't mean living in perpetual skepticism. It means balancing belief with awareness. Like a skilled architect renovating an ancient structure, you must decide which pillars to preserve and which to tear down. Here's a practice. Before forming an opinion, articulate the opposing view as convincingly as possible. Not to mock it, but to understand it. The moment you can hold two contradictory ideas without rage or panic, you begin to glimpse true clarity. The fog of ego begins to thin, and once you've seen how the mind constructs illusion, you can no longer be its prisoner. You become the architect, not of false certainty, but of conscious awareness. The next time you catch yourself reacting, pause and trace the blueprint of your thought. Ask, what is this built upon? If the answer is emotion, habit, or fear, then the structure must be redesigned. Because only when the architecture of thought aligns with truth does decision-making transform from impulse to insight. Imagine trying to navigate through a storm with a compass that constantly tilts toward your fears. That's what decision-making feels like under emotional influence. Every feeling, fear, anger, desire, pride, bends perception, distorts data, and drags reason into orbit around itself. Emotions aren't enemies, but they are gravitational forces. They pull your thoughts into predictable patterns, often invisible until the damage is done. You make a decision that feels right, only to regret it hours later. You justify an argument long after realizing you were wrong. You cling to a job, a relationship, or a belief because walking away would bruise your ego. These moments aren't signs of weakness. They are signs of humanity. But if you want to think clearly, you must understand this law of emotional gravity and learn to work with it rather than against it. Here's the paradox. Emotion gives life meaning, yet it also clouds meaning. A purely logical mind would be sterile, mechanical, incapable of empathy or purpose. But an emotion-driven mind is chaos wearing a smile. The art of clear thinking lies in balancing the two. Reason as the rudder, emotion as the wind. Without the rudder, you drift. Without the wind, you stall. Every emotion carries a hidden narrative. Fear whispers, "You might fail." Anger hisses, "You've been disrespected." Desire murmurs, "You need this to be complete." These voices shape perception long before reason has a chance to speak. The first step toward emotional clarity is recognition, naming what you feel before you decide what to do. Neuroscientists call this effect labeling, and its effect is profound. When you name an emotion, you reduce its unconscious power. The storm doesn't vanish, but you regain control of the wheel. Yet, most people never pause to ask, "What am I actually feeling right now?" Instead, they react, mistaking emotion for intuition. This confusion is dangerous because intuition and emotion feel identical but come from different sources. Intuition arises from accumulated experience and subtle pattern recognition. Emotion arises from immediate reaction and personal attachment. One guides, the other manipulates. To differentiate them, you must cultivate inner stillness. Intuition speaks in whispers when the mind is calm. Emotion screams when it's agitated. Learn to listen for tone. The quiet insight that arrives without urgency often carries truth. The thought that demands immediate action often carries bias. The practice of clear emotional thinking isn't about suppressing feelings, it's about witnessing them. This witnessing is a discipline of attention. When you feel anger, instead of reacting, observe the heat rising in your chest. When fear tightens your throat, notice its texture, its rhythm. You are not the emotion, you are the awareness that experiences it. Once you stand in that awareness, you become free to choose rather than react. It's said that Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic philosopher-emperor, would write in his journal each night to examine his impulses, fears, and judgments. Through this practice, he learned to separate the event itself from his emotional interpretation of it. His insight still echoes across centuries. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That strength is not detachment, it's discernment. It allows you to feel fully while deciding wisely, because decisions born purely from emotion often lead to clarity's opposite, regret. Think of every rash text you've sent, every promise made in excitement, every bridge burned in anger. Those weren't failures of intelligence. They were failures of emotional awareness. To regain balance, slow the tempo of thought. When a powerful emotion strikes, say to yourself, "This is not truth. This is a state." Then breathe. The emotional storm will pass, and what remains afterward, what persists in the calm, is usually closer to reality. Clear thinking isn't emotionless. It's emotion illuminated. The difference between the wise and the impulsive is not what they feel, but what they do with what they feel. Emotion is the fire. Reason is the glass lantern. Together, they light the path forward. Stand at the edge of a vast canyon. The wind sweeps through, carrying echoes from miles away. The view is breathtaking, yet humbling. You realize how small you are, how vast the landscape is, how little your own concerns matter against the immensity of existence. That moment of humility, that widening of perception, is not just awe, it's perspective. And perspective is the secret antidote to confusion. Most of what we call poor decision-making is simply the failure to see beyond ourselves. The mind, left to its default setting, sees life from a narrow aperture. It filters experience through the lens of personal bias, urgency, and emotion. Every situation becomes about us. Our needs, our opinions, our pain, our ego. This self-centered framing distorts clarity like a curved mirror, magnifying our fears and minimizing the truth. To think clearly, one must learn to step outside the boundaries of self. This is not an act of denial, it's an act of expansion. When you broaden your field of view, decisions become less reactive and more rational. You stop asking, "What do I want right now?" and start asking, "What is true in this moment, even if it's uncomfortable?" Perspective is not given, it's earned. It grows through experience, reflection, and empathy. It demands that you look at your beliefs and choices as if they belong to someone else. What advice would you give if you weren't emotionally entangled in your own story? What truth would you see if your ego weren't whispering in your ear? One powerful practice for gaining perspective is deliberate distance. When facing a major decision, Imagine advising a friend in your exact situation. The emotional fog begins to thin. You step into the role of observer rather than participant, and suddenly, patterns become visible. Time slows, clarity emerges. This technique, known in cognitive psychology as self-distancing, allows you to evaluate your situation with detachment and compassion, without the distorting weight of identity. But perspective isn't just about distance, it's also about depth. The clearest thinkers are those who can hold multiple dimensions of truth simultaneously. They can see both the forest and the trees, both emotion and logic, both short-term consequence and long-term principle. They understand that wisdom lives in the tension between opposites. Take, for instance, the ancient Stoics who trained themselves to view life from the standpoint of the cosmos. Epictetus would remind his students to imagine themselves as citizens of the world, not merely of a city or tribe. By seeing the larger pattern, personal struggles shrank in scale, and decisions aligned with universal reason rather than personal impulse. Perspective, in their philosophy, was a discipline of liberation. As Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." Perspective provides that why. It anchors decisions in meaning beyond comfort or convenience. Without it, the smallest obstacles feel insurmountable. With it, even suffering becomes navigable. Yet, in the modern age, perspective is eroding. The digital world collapses scale. Every crisis feels immediate. Every opinion feels personal. We drown in microscopic focus. Endless comparisons, polarized debates, and algorithmic tunnels that make the world seem both smaller and louder. Clarity requires rebellion against this narrowing. It means zooming out, seeing the pattern beneath the noise. Try this. When anxiety grips you, imagine yourself from a distance of 50 years. What would your future self think of this moment? Most worries fade under that light. The mind, when granted time and space, reorders priorities naturally. You begin to act not out of panic, but from principle. Perspective is humility in motion. It says, "I am not the center, but a participant." When you start viewing life through that lens, clear thinking follows almost inevitably. Decisions stop being about winning and start being about understanding. You stop clinging to the illusion of control and begin dancing with complexity instead. The discipline of perspective doesn't erase struggle, it refines it. It teaches you to ask better questions, to listen more deeply, to act from vision rather than fear. And when the self no longer blinds you, truth begins to reveal itself in full, unfiltered light. Clarity by itself is not enough. Seeing clearly and acting wisely are two different kinds of courage. Many people reach the threshold of understanding but never step through it. They mistake awareness for transformation. But clarity is meant to be lived, not admired. To think clearly and still do nothing is like polishing a window but never looking through it. Every great decision in history began with a moment of inner stillness, a glimpse of truth beneath confusion. But the true test comes next. Can you act upon what you see? The tragedy of human reason is that clarity often arrives when emotion has already moved on. We understand what we should do, yet the weight of uncertainty paralyzes us. That's when clarity must evolve into resolve. The bridge between the two is discipline. Clear thinking without disciplined execution is like a map without motion. Discipline transforms insight into momentum. It's what allows you to make decisions not based on mood, but on principle. And principles, once forged, serve as the compass of a clear mind. Yet action, like thought, has its own illusions. We often mistake busyness for progress, movement for meaning. The decisive person is not the one who acts fastest, but the one who acts cleanly, without the residue of hesitation, ego, or fear. To act with clarity means to align what you know, what you feel, and what you do. It's integrity in motion. There's a quiet power in decisive wisdom. It's the strength to choose even when outcomes are uncertain. It's the refusal to be ruled by indecision disguised as caution. Clarity doesn't promise certainty, it offers alignment. The wise understand that a perfect decision doesn't exist. What matters is the purity of intention and the depth of awareness behind it. Think of the samurai code in ancient Japan. Before battle, warriors would meditate not on victory, but on death. not out of morbidity, but to clear fear from the mind. By accepting the worst possible outcome, they freed themselves to act decisively in the present. The same applies to modern life. When you release your attachment to control, decisions lose their terror. You no longer seek the safe choice, you seek the true one. Acting with clarity means making peace with imperfection. It means choosing the best course with the knowledge available and then accepting whatever follows. The mind that obsesses over outcomes will always drown in anxiety. But the mind anchored in principle moves with quiet conviction. In his timeless reflection on courage, Aristotle observed, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit." The cultivation of clear thinking is exactly that, a habit of excellence. You practice it in small moments. The pause before speaking in anger, the reflection before reacting, the awareness before deciding. Over time, these moments accumulate into character. And character is what sustains clarity under pressure. Here's a simple but profound truth. Every decision is a mirror. It reflects not only what you think, but who you are. If your choices are born of fear, you will live a fearful life. If they arise from integrity, you will live with coherence. The goal of clear thinking, then, is not just better decisions, it's a better self. So how do you carry clarity forward? You practice 3 things. 1. Stillness before choice, to quiet the noise and let truth surface. 2. Perspective within choice, to see the decision from multiple angles, not just your own. 3. Acceptance after choice, to release regret and learn without self-punishment. When these 3 converge, decision-making becomes an art. You stop chasing perfect answers and begin living from intelligent presence. Life unfolds not as a series of dilemmas, but as a sequence of deliberate moments. Stand again in that first image, the busy intersection, the flashing lights, the noise. You breathe, centered and calm. You no longer hesitate because the fog within has lifted. You step forward not blindly but consciously. Every sound, every light, every movement now feels sharp and alive. The world hasn't changed, you have. Clarity is not a gift granted to a few. It's a discipline available to all. It begins in silence, deepens through perspective, matures through emotion, and expresses itself in decisive wisdom. The clearer your mind becomes, the freer your life feels. Because to think clearly is not merely to know, it is, finally, to see.